Earl Nelson was born on May 12, 1897. Before he even turned 2 years old, Nelson's parents would pass away due to syphilis, and he would be sent to live with his maternal grandmother. When Nelson was around 10 years old, he would be riding his bicycle when suddenly a car would accidentally hit him. This injury would leave him completely unconscious for 6 days, and after he woke up, he wasn't the same. He was mentally unstable, he had frequent headaches, and he suffered from memory loss. His life would become even worse when his grandmother suddenly passed away, and he would be sent to live with his aunt and uncle. When he was around 18, he would break into a cabin that he believed was abandoned, but it turns out it wasn't, and he would be caught and arrested. By the end of his trial in 1915, he would be sentenced to 2 years in San Quentin State Prison. Shortly after this, he would spend a short amount of time in the United States Navy, but during his time there, he seemed very mentally unstable, which caused him to be moved to Napa State Mental Hospital. While in the hospital, he would somehow escape his cell 3 times before hospital staff found him. Eventually, though, he escaped the hospital permanently. On May 19, 1921, Earl would disguise himself as a plumber so that he could break into a house in San Francisco, California. Inside lived Mary Summers, who was only 12 years old at the time. Luckily, before Earl made his way into the home, she began screaming, which caused him to flee, and he would be caught and arrested hours later. After his arrest, he would again be sentenced to Napa State Mental Hospital, but in 1825, he would successfully escape again, and in October of that year, his killing spree would begin. Around that time, Earl would kill 3 women in Philadelphia, which were Ola McCoy, Mae Murray, and Lillian Weiner. Each crime scene looked similar, with each of the victims being found in their home and then being sexually assaulted. It was also noted that each home that Earl invaded had a room for rent sign attached to the window. After these killings, Earl would return to San Francisco, and from February to August of 1926, 5 more women would be murdered. Like the unsolved cases in Philadelphia, these women had a room for rent sign on their homes, and Earl had sexually assaulted the bodies. He would then take his victims' valuables and sell them. At the time, police had no leads, but they did have a description of the potential killer. The killer was described as being a stocky man with long arms and big hands. This description dubbed the unknown serial killer's name as the Gorilla Man, and this name would be used in newspapers. Earl would begin targeting his victims all over North America. Some places his crimes were committed at were Chicago, Kansas City, New York, and Winnipeg, Canada. In Winnipeg, Earl would take the lives of 2 victims, which were 14-year-old Lola Cowan and Emily Patterson. Lola's murder would occur on June 8, 1927, and after committing the murder, Earl stuffed her body underneath her bed and then slept on her bed that night. On June 10th, Earl would attack and kill Emily Patterson. While she was being attacked, she would be able to tear some of Earl's hair off his head before she would succumb to her attacker. After the murder, Earl would go sell some of Emily's and her husband's possessions at a pawn shop. Luckily, once police began investigating this case, they were able to track the items to the pawn shop. After arriving at the shop, the owner told them that Earl had gone to a barber shop, and once they arrived there, the owner told them that the suspected individual had blood in their hair. Thanks to the help of the 2 owners, police were able to get a description which matched Earl's. On June 12th, Earl was planning on committing another murder when he discovered a description of him in the newspaper, which after seeing that, he decided to flee. On June 16th, Earl would be in Killarney, Canada, when a civilian recognized him as a match to the description in the newspaper. Luckily, this tip would help police arrest Earl that same day. However, that night, while in jail, he would pick the lock to his cell door and escape. But the next day, he would again be arrested after he was caught trying to board a train. By the end of his trial, it was confirmed that he was connected to taking the lives of 22 victims, and he would be given the death penalty. His sentence would be carried out on January 13, 1928. It's November 29th, 1970, and a father and his 2 daughters were hiking outside of Bergen, Norway. As they were hiking, they made the horrific discovery of a severely burnt woman who was laying on her back with her head pointing towards a valley, which was called the Valley of Death by locals. She was also surrounded by large stones. The 3 would quickly return to civilization and report the discovery to the police. The investigation would reveal that all the labels on the clothing she was wearing were removed. She had multiple fake identities on her, and she left a bunch of coded messages. Even after using DNA testing on the body, the identity of the woman remained unknown. Investigators began theorizing that maybe the woman caught on fire, and in a panic, she launched herself backwards, or that she might have been murdered. The woman also had jewelry with her, but it had been placed next to her like it was a ritual. Luckily for police, they were able to find some witnesses that were able to describe what the woman looked like. She was described as being around 5'4", long brownish black hair, between 25 to 40 years old, brown eyes, a roundish face, and small ears. Another break in the case would be made just days after the discovery. There were 2 suitcases located at the Bergen railway station's luggage department. Inside one of the cases were glasses that had the woman's fingerprint on them. More of the woman's belongings were found, but all of the labels had been removed. Police would look at the coded messages the woman left behind, and luckily they were able to decode them. The messages had the hotels that the woman had stayed at. Throughout the woman's multiple belongings, one of them stood out. It was a pair of boots from Oscar Wartved's footwear store. Police would go and speak to the owner's son, who claimed that he had sold a pair of boots to a woman who was well-dressed, and she had apparently taken a long time to choose a pair. Authorities were also able to trace her back to a hotel, but she had used a fake name to check in, which was Fenella Lorch. It was also later discovered that she had stayed at multiple other hotels, but she had used different fake names at those hotels as well. A waitress at one of the hotels told police that the woman had been staring at her, and she was talking with 2 German Navy personnel. The waitress's story caused authorities to believe that the woman was a spy due to the Cold War going on at that time. The autopsy of the woman would reveal that she had a bruise on her neck, she had smoke particles in her lungs, and there were 50 to 70 sleeping pills in her stomach. However, police were never able to find the woman's identity. In 1971, officers who were working on the case attended the Isdal Woman's funeral. In 2016, the case would be reopened, but even after going over all the evidence, the woman's identity remains unsolved. Richard Chase was born on May 23, 1950, in Sacramento, California. During his childhood, his father, who was an alcoholic, would frequently beat him, which led to him to start killing animals. During his teen years, he would start drinking, doing drugs, and he would be in multiple different relationships with girls, but these relationships wouldn't last long because he couldn't get aroused. Chase would try to get help with this issue, but he was told the reason this was happening was due to mental illness or repressed anger. After being told this, he wouldn't get any more help. Once he became an adult, he would move back to his parents' house, and while living there, he accused his mom of trying to poison him. Because of his false accusations towards his mother, Chase's father decided to buy his son his own apartment. After moving in, Chase would have multiple different roommates, which all claimed that he had acted strange when they were living there. He eventually started living alone, and once this began, he started killing animals again. However, this time, he started eating and blending up animals raw. In 1976, he was taken to the hospital after he inserted rabbit blood into himself. During his time at the hospital, the different patients and staff began calling him Dracula due to him drinking animal blood. Around a year later, in 1977, Chase would be caught naked in a field in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. He had killed a cow and began smearing himself in its blood. The police wouldn't do anything about it. Unfortunately, shortly after this, Chase began going after people. He would be involved in a drive-by, and during it, he shot and killed Ambrose Griffin, who was helping his wife bring in groceries. He was an engineer and only 56 at the time of his death. Police would investigate, and Chase would get away with this killing. His next victim would be 22-year-old Teresa Wallen, who was 3 months pregnant at the time. January 23rd, 1978, Chase would be walking around the neighborhood that Wallen lived in and was testing doors to see if they were unlocked. Once he arrived at the Wallen's home, he tested the door and it was unlocked. He walked in and found Teresa taking out the trash and threatened her with the gun. He shot her twice, once in the palm and the other at the top of her head. As soon as she fell to the ground, he fired another shot into her temple. Chase began to remove her organs, and started smearing her blood all over himself and all over the home. He had also used an empty yogurt container to drink her blood and stuffed animal feces in her mouth. Her husband, David, would come home from work to discover this horrific crime scene. Using evidence from the scene, police would be able to determine a description of the killer. This description was a match to Chase, but police did not know who Richard was at the time. On January 27th, Chase would murder his last victims. Chase would once again enter a home where inside he would take the lives of 36-year-old Evelyn Miroth, her son, 6-year-old Jason Miroth, Daniel Meredith, who was a family friend, and Michael Ferreira, who was Evelyn's 22-month-old nephew that she was watching at the time. Later, a cardboard box that contained Michael's remains was found in a church parking lot. The crime scene would be similar to Wallen's crime scene, which linked the two murders together. This time, however, Daniel's red station wagon was missing. However, it would soon be found abandoned not far from Evelyn's home. Police were desperate to look for this killer before he struck again, and they began asking people if they had seen someone who matched the description of the killer. The police found 2 suspects they believed that had been driving the station wagon, but they were proven innocent. Eventually, a woman in her late 20s would make a report to police saying that someone she went to high school with came up to her and tried to open her car door. When asked the identity of this individual, she said it was Richard Chase. Police found the apartment he was living in and waited for him to come out. He would eventually open his door and begin running to his truck. Luckily, police were able to detain him. His apartment was littered with blenders that contained blood, dirty clothes, and a container that had human brain tissue. His trial would begin in 1879, and Chase pleaded not guilty due to reason of insanity. However, he was proven to be sane when he was committing the murders and was found guilty on 6 counts of murder and given the death penalty. While in prison, though, he began receiving medicine, but instead of taking it, he stored all of it in his cell, and on December 26, 1980, he would be found dead in his cell. It's the morning of April 20th, 1989, and a corpse is lying in Central Park. The identity of the body was a 28-year-old woman named Trisha Malilly, and she had been severely beaten and raped. Once she was taken to the hospital, it was revealed that she lost 75% of her blood, and she had a severe skull fracture. The result of her injuries left her in a coma for 2 weeks, and once she woke up, she didn't remember anything from the night she was attacked. Investigations would commence, and it turns out on the night of April 19th, Trisha decided to go on a run in Central Park, and that's when her horrifying attack began. She had been beaten with the rock, tied up, and then raped. Luckily, just within 5 days of the attack, police would be able to find 5 individuals who took part in this assault. Raymond Santana, who was 14, Antron McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusuf Salam, who were all 15, and Corey Wise, who was 16, were all found to be connected to the assault. After interrogating all the teenagers, it was revealed they were part of a gang called the Wolf Pack. The group consisted of 30 teenagers, and they had committed the attacks on random people, like a taxi driver and another male jogger. Once they were caught, there was no remorse for the 5 teens. Multiple news articles were bashing the teens and giving them names like savages and animals. Even Donald Trump, who at the time was a real estate developer but would become America's 45th president, put out a headline and stated, "Bring back the death penalty, bring back our police." Just days after the attack, all 5 of the teens were arrested. In 1990, all 5 of the teens' trials would begin. The largest amount of evidence against the teens was that 4 out of the 5 of them confessed to committing the crime. However, according to Yusuf Salam, the night they were interrogated, they were not allowed food, water, or sleep for more than 24 hours. The teens claimed they were all forced to confess to the crime. More evidence against police would begin to build up. None of the teens' DNA was at the crime scene, and there was no witnesses either. Despite the obvious lack of evidence, all 5 of them were found guilty. Salam, Santana, and McCrae were found guilty of assault, rape, robbery, and riot. Richardson was convicted of rape, attempted murder, assault, and robbery, and Corey was convicted of assault, sexual abuse, and riot. Between all of them, they remained in prison from 6 to 13 years. However, in 2002, a serial rapist named Matthias Reyes, who was in prison, confessed that he assaulted Trisha. He took a DNA test, and it turns out that he was a match to the DNA at the crime scene, and on December 19th of that same year, the Supreme Court removed the charges from all 5 of them. The next year, all 5 of them would sue New York City for emotional distress, racial discrimination, and malicious prosecution, and by the end of it, New York would settle with them for $41 million, with each of them getting $1 million each year for how many years they were held captive. Luckily, all 5 men have been successful since they were released from prison, and in 2012, a documentary about the case was released. On the shelf lies one of the most well-known and beloved candies in Japan, Pocky Sticks. At the time, in the 1980s, the Izaki Glico Company was one of the most successful candy companies in Japan, having their products in multiple different stores. It was March 18th, 1984, and the company's president, Katsuyosa Ezaki, had arrived home after having a bad day at work. However, his day quickly improved after he saw his wife and 3 children waiting for his arrival. Later that night, Ezaki would turn on the water to his bathtub to settle down for the night. Next door, Ezaki's 70-year-old mother was also getting ready for bed when she heard someone barge into her home. She would look up in fear and dread as she saw 2 men wearing white ski masks approaching her, threatening her with guns. They would eventually restrain her by tying her up and demanding she tell them where the keys were to her son's house. Once she gave them the location of the key, the 2 men went to go invade Ezaki's home. Once they entered, they found Ezaki's wife and daughter, and they would tie them up. The 2 men were interested in finding Ezaki, and they eventually found him in the bath. Ezaki began yelling at the 2 to leave his home, but they threatened to harm the rest of his family if he didn't cooperate with them. Ezaki would be taken by the 2 men outside to their getaway car, and they would quickly flee the neighborhood. The next morning, police were at Ezaki's residence investigating the kidnapping. Their main goal was trying to find a motive for why the 2 men kidnapped Ezaki in the first place. However, police would soon discover a note that was left at a phone booth near the home. It was a ransom note, and it was demanding that the Glico Company pay 1 billion yen and give 220 pounds of gold bullion, which was worth around $1.3 million, to the kidnappers. On March 21st, 1984, who at this point had been held captive for 3 days, was trying to loosen the ropes he was tied up in. Luckily, he was successful and ran towards the door. Once he kicked it down, he began sprinting down the road and towards authorities. Once police began interrogating him on what happened, he said that the only injuries he was given were just a few scratches on his face, and he also believed that the 2 men were using fake guns. On April 10th, multiple vehicles at the Glico headquarters would be set aflame in the parking lot. Shortly after this, on April 16th, a plastic container that contained hydraulic acid in Ibaraki, which was the same city that Izaki was held captive at. The individual or individuals who left this container also left a letter which demanded the company to give them money. Another letter would be sent out, but this time it was to the media. This letter stated, "To the stupid police, are you idiots? If you were pros, you would catch us. Because you guys have such a high handicap, we're gonna give you some hints." The hints that the letter included was that the getaway car was gray and they had purchased some food from a supermarket. The letter was signed by the monster with 21 faces. In May, the letters continued to be sent out to the Glico Company, police, and the press. These letters would be signed by the same people. The writer of these letters claimed to have laced the candy from the Glico Company with potassium cyanide, which can be lethal. Due to this, the company had to remove $21 million worth of products off store shelves, and they had to lay off over 1,000 employees. Soon after this devastating downfall, another fire would be set around a Glico building. A lead on the case was almost made when a man wearing a baseball cap and a business suit was caught on camera putting candy he brought on the shelves, which could have been tainted with poison. The video would be released to the public, but the identity of this man remains unknown and still to this day does. Like usual at this point, another letter would be discovered, but this time it was trying to make peace with the police and the press. The writer of this letter claimed they were bored of taunting the police and they were going to Europe to avoid the summer weather. However, the short amount of relief would be cut short when they started writing letters to different candy and food companies in Japan. One of the companies they were harassing now was Marodia. Soon after the harassment towards Marodia began, another letter would be sent out to the Glico Company, demanding if they paid them 50 million yen, which is worth around $250,000, they would stop harassing them. Glico would agree to this, and 2 days later, an undercover police officer, disguised as a Glico employee, would board a train to the meeting spot. The writer of this letter stated that the employees need to look for a white flag and once he located it, he needed to toss the money off the train. This officer would soon notice a larger man with glasses and brown hair looking at him on the train. However, as the train ride was coming to an end, the officer didn't see a white flag, and he eventually got on another train to go back home. Once he returned home, he described the man on the train that was watching him, and he would be known to Japan as the Fox-eyed man. Soon after this, letters continued to be sent out, but this time, they contained around 30 grams of sodium cyanide, which if consumed, could kill an individual. In October of 1984, a letter that was addressed to Moms of the Nation claimed they laced the candy from a company called Morinaga. Police would begin searching the candy all over Japan, and they found that some of the candy was laced. The candy that had been laced had a warning sticker from the Monster of 21 Faces stating, "Danger, contains poison, you'll die if you eat this." Morinaga would have a 60% loss in sales due to this. Laced candy would be discovered over the next several months, and even into the next year. Police were still hunting after the Fox-eyed man during this time as well. Luckily for police, they would soon have their big break. A station wagon was found near a drop-off. A police officer would drive up to the car, and inside was a man who was estimated to be in his 40s. He was just sitting there doing nothing, but once the officer approached him, he sped off. Police would go on a hunt for the vehicle, and they found it abandoned not far from the original location. Further investigation revealed that the car had been stolen from another town, and inside was a police radio. The same harassment of police and multiple companies continued for the next several months, but finally on August 12, 1985, the Monster of 21 Faces would send out their final letter. The last line of the letter read, "We are bad guys. That means we've got more to do other than bullying companies. It's fun to lead a bad man's life." To this day, this case remains unsolved. Alright, so before I say the announcement, I want to say I really appreciate your support recently. We just hit 400 subscribers at the time I'm recording this, which is June 1st, but I really appreciate your support. So the announcement is that I have uploaded all my videos onto Spotify, so you can listen to them. Link in the description and on my About Me section or whatever, it should be there. And yeah, all the videos are uploaded onto Spotify now. I will be uploading my new videos on there too. So I upload all my old videos, so everything is on there. So you can go listen right now if you want to. But again, I really appreciate your support, and see you all next time. Goodbye.